Hello guys, welcome to the Parsons series, and today we are going to start a new one, that is Uveal Tract. So let's get started with it. First of all, starting with the anatomy and physiology of the uveal tract. Now, as we all know, uvea is a highly vascular layer, and those of you who have studied from me knows that we always draw it with the red color because it is the most vascular part and it lines the sclera. So what is the prime function? If it is highly vascular, it is providing the nutrition to the eye, and then you have got the iris. This iris is responsible for the metabolism of the anterior segment. We have by the diffusion of the metabolites. So metabolites are actually diffused through this aqueous humor. Then we know the ciliary body. Now we have got three parts of the uveal tract. That is, we have iris, we have ciliary body, and we have got choroid. So one by one they are telling you what are the different functions of the different parts. We have got the iris. Iris is there, and that is actually responsible for the metabolism. Then you have the ciliary body. Ciliary body is secreting the aqueous humor, and that baths the avascular structures. So we know that the structures like lens and the cornea, which are avascular, gets the nutrition from this aqueous humor, and its vascularity unfortunately allows the frequent involvement of the uveal tract in the systemic vascular, immune and the infectious diseases. And that is the reason why actually uveal tract is so important, because it is involved in the vascular diseases, immune diseases, infectious diseases. Now, although separate topographically, if I talk about the iris, ciliary body and this choroid, that forms a continuous whole, continuous circle, and that is why it is actually called as the one uveal tract. Now, if you look at the diseases, the most important is the inflammation, that is the uveitis, and this term uveitis emphasizes that there is a close relationship between the anatomically distinct parts of the uveal tract, and all the inflammatory processes tend to involve the uvea as a whole and are generally not limited to a single region. Whenever we are talking about the uveitis, it is involving either the iris and the part of the ciliary body, or it is involving the posterior part of the ciliary body, it is involving the choroid, and if it is involving the choroid, then the retina is also got connected. And there is also a type of inflammation where whole of the uveal tract is involved, that is your panuveitis. So definitely speaking, we have got different types of uveitis pertaining to different parts of the uveal tract. Now, this feature is particularly well exemplified in the inflammation of the iris and the ciliary body, and iritis never occurs without some cyclitis, nor some cyclitis occurs without iritis, and that is the reason whenever I have iritis, I call it as iridocyclitis. Whenever I have cyclitis, I call it as iridocyclitis, and specifically speaking, iritis and cyclitis alone will be found in very less of the circumstances. So if you go with the standardization of the uveitis nomenclature, this is your Sun. Standardization of the uveitis nomenclature, this is Sun classification. It is based on the anatomical location. So anatomical location के हिसाब से I can call it as the iridocyclitis, right? We can call it as iridocyclitis, means it contains the iritis along with the pars plicatus. That means it is involving the pars plica part of the ciliary body, pars plica inflammation, so iris plus the pars plica. Then we can have the pars plana. Pars plana part, that is the posterior part of the ciliary body, so this will be called as the pars planitis. Then we can have the involvement of the choroid along with the retina, so that will be called as the chorioretinitis. I can even have the involvement of whole of the uveal tract, that will be called as the panuveitis. That will be called as the panuveitis. So we have iridocyclitis, we have pars planitis, chorioretinitis, panuveitis. We have got different types. All right. Now, if you see the classification of the uveitis, which is based on the predominant anatomical site that is affected. So apart from the classification which is based on the anatomical site, it can also be classified into acute, chronic, recurrent, and by pathology we can have the granulomatous and non-granulomatous. So if I talk of the most common one that is used, that is your anatomical classification. We have got the anterior, intermediate and the posterior. But apart from that, I can also use other classifications. Just we have acute, we have chronic, we have got recurrent, we can also have pathological classification that according to the type of inflammation, that is granulomatous or non-granulomatous. Now if I talk about the granulomatous iridocyclitis, this is actually characterized by large KPs. So whenever we have got, why? Because what are actually KPs. See, whenever you have uveitis, one of the important features that you have is the KPs. KPs means keratic precipitates. So these keratic precipitates are the inflammatory cells which are released. Now, if I talk about the granulomatous one, so what are the kind of cells they will be released? The type of cells will be macrophages. While if it is non-granulomatous, it is lymphocytes. So that is the reason. If you look here, I have got the granulomatous iridocyclitis. So what are the kind of uveitis KPs I will have? Mutton fat KPs I will have, which are the deposits of the lymphocytes. So in the granulomatous, actually they are not the lymphocytes, it is the macrophages which are derived from the aqueous, and this is, you know, somewhat thing. When we have got the non-pigmented KPs, the small one, fine non-pigmented KPs, then actually we have the lymphocytes. Then actually it is the lymphocytes. But when I talk about the mutton fat KPs, right? Mutton fat KPs that we get in cases of granulomatous diseases, then it is actually the macrophages. Then it is the macrophages that we are getting. Okay, then we can have the what you called as posterior synecdoche. We can have the iris nodules. So whenever you have iris nodules, they are again a feature of granulomatous kind of uveitis. There I can have the nodules on the pupillary border. These are called as a Koipe nodule. We can also have on the peripheral part of the iris. These are called as the Busacca nodules. So again, two kind of nodules we have. Now how to remember them? Look at the pupillary. I've got 2P here, 1P here and 1P here. So Koipe also contains 2P here. Similarly, if I talk about the Busacca nodule, so Busacca is present at the peripheral part. So you can remember B for Busacca and B for base. That is your base of the iris पे होते हैं. So that means if I am talking about the granulomatous uveitis, I am looking for the mutton fat KPs, I am looking for the Busacca nodules. Alright. Now see this, these are your mutton fat KPs. So all those pictures which are given in the Parsons are really important, and that is why most of the pictures that have been given by me in e-Gurukul as well as your classes, okay, are the pictures which have been shared in the Parsons, right? So these are your mutton fat KPs. Can you appreciate these? Large one, fluffy, yellowish, laudaceous. This is your mutton fat KPs, and therefore KPs means uveitis, and this mutton fat KPs means a granulomatous uveitis. So maybe you are thinking about the granulomatous etiology. Alright, then afterwards a very important thing, see this, here you are getting these nodules just at the pupillary border. So these are actually your Koipe nodules. So these are your Koipe nodules which are present at the pupillary border. So you can easily classify it. Okay. Now, when I talk about the granulomatous uveitis, it is due to the invasion of the eye by the living organism. So, whenever I am thinking about the granulomatous uveitis, either it could be the invasion by the living organism itself, or it could be an autoimmune etiology. So, what type of hypersensitivity reaction? It is your type 4 hypersensitivity reaction, that is very, very common. Now, suppose there is some absence of the prior sensitization of the tissues, then this inflammation will be insidious in onset with a chronic course, and there will be a quiescent inflammatory reaction. Now, if I talk about the chronic one, so we have chronic inflammation due to the direct organismal infection, and there will be dense nodular infiltration rather than the diffuse exudative. So, means when you are having the granulomatous inflammation, what are the things you are going to think of? Either I have a live invasion by the organism, or I have some autoimmune etiology, or if I am thinking about the hypersensitivity reaction, then that will be type 4. Then in the absence of the prior sensitization, you can have a chronic inflammation. So that will be insidious in onset, and these are due to the dense nodular infiltration. So what kind of infiltration you are expecting is the dense nodular, not the diffuse one. While on the other hand, if I have the non-granulomatous uveitis, so here I will have fine KPs that I told you, and these are actually the fine KPs which are the lymphocytes. M4M, mutton fat KPs, will be your macrophages, and this will be comparatively acute onset, shorter duration. This will be diffuse. So there is a clear-cut demarcation. If you see one hand, I have granulomatous, chronic it is, nodular it is, mutton fat KPs it is, while here in the non-granulomatous, acute it is. Then we have got diffuse, we have got small KPs, the lymphocytes. There is a considerable flare in the cells. We have a hypopion, and if you look at the keratic precipitates, they are made up of the lymphoid cells and the polymorphs. Now, what should be the etiology? Means uveitis itself means that it is of infectious etiology, inflammatory etiology. So what are the things which are causing this? So if you look here, determining the etiology of the inflammation of the uveal tract is one of the most difficult problems in the ophthalmology. So in some cases the etiology is obvious, and severe infections have distinguishing clinical features, but in most of the cases with a non-descript clinical picture, a definite diagnosis is difficult. So we are able to make a diagnosis that this patient is having uveitis. We are able to make out that whether it is acute or chronic, granulomatous, non-granulomatous, but the typical etiology is actually difficult. It seems probable that most of these are not due to the direct infection, but they are immunogenic in origin. So this is well a known fact that uveitis is actually immunogenic in origin, and most of the times this is the reason that you have uveitis with other things, like you have uveitis with arthritis, you have the triad of Behçet syndrome, you have the triad of the Ritter syndrome, because this pathology is autoimmune in nature, and if the pathology is autoimmune in nature, you will definitely get somewhere other places also the autoantibodies. Now the foreign antigen is usually an infectious agent, and the uveitis occurs late in the course of predisposing disease. Now the following classification may prove useful. So we can have either the infective exogenous infections, we can have secondary infections, we can have endogenous infections. So if I talk about the exogenous infections, so in the exogenous infections, due to the introduction into the eye, they are coming through the perforating wound or ulcer. So whenever there is a perforation, there is a wound, there is an ulcer, there is a possibility that the infectious agent coming from outside is entering the eye, and this will lead into the acute iridocyclitis, and mostly it is suppurative. Suppurative means the pus forming. So it can be due to the endophthalmitis. Endophthalmitis. Endo means the inner layer of the eyeball is involved, because there is an inflammation in the inner coat, and the outer layer, that is sclera, will be spared. Sometimes we also have the panophthalmitis. Here I have endophthalmitis, then even there could be panophthalmitis. Now the simple difference between endophthalmitis and the panophthalmitis is the involvement of sclera. So I can say endophthalmitis plus sclera is equal to panophthalmitis, which is extending up to the sclera as well as episclera. So if sclera and episclera is actually involved, it is the panophthalmitis. Now talking about the secondary infections. Secondary infections that means it is coming due to the spread. So this spread is from one or the other ocular tissues. It could be coming from any other tissue. So we can have the cornea, sclera, or the retina infection going. While the third is your endogenous infections. Endogenous infections the organisms are lodged in the other organ of the body, and they are actually reaching the bloodstream. So basically whenever we have the infectious agent going to the uveal tract, it is a three routes. Either it is exogenous coming from outside, or it is coming from any other organ, right, or it is coming from the bloodstream. So these comprises of the bacterial infections. There are a lot of bacterial infections which are known to cause uveitis. We have tuberculosis, syphilis, gonorrhea, brucellosis. Then we also have the viral infections where mumps, smallpox, influenza, in which we have iridocyclitis. We can also have the protozoal infections. In the protozoal infections, we can have toxoplasmosis. So the same mechanism will also cause the violent panophthalmitis, which is seen in the septicemia. It could be due to the streptococcus, we have staphylococcus, meningococcus, pneumococcus, and the inflammation is actually the suppurative one. So basically, if you look here, endogenous infections could be bacterial also, it could be viral also, it could be protozoal also, and that is why if I say uniform, coverage of the organs and the uniform coverage by the infectious agents is found in the uveal tract, means if I am having an infection inside, so I could be having a bacterial infection there causing the uveitis. It could be tuberculosis, the syphilis, gonorrhea, brucellosis. It could be viral infection. We can have mumps, we can have smallpox, we can have influenza, we can also have the protozoal one. Then even septicemia could also be there, which are caused by the streptococcus, staphylococcus. We have meningococcus, pneumococcus. So anything could be possible there. Then we can also have your immune related things. Immune related inflammations are generally common. A primary source exists somewhere in the body, and this is generalized due to the escape of the organism in the bloodstream, and then there is a sensitization. So yes, we have a lot of routes by which this uveitis can occur, right? So if you start with the acute iridocyclitis, this acute iridocyclitis may be comparable to the simple act of antibody formation in a lymph node, but it is possible that the immunological thymus dependent memory cells may be implanted in the eye. Now, if I talk about the acute iridocyclitis or the acute anterior uveitis, it is comparable to the same antibody formation that takes place in the thymus also, and it takes place in the lymph node also. It is possible that immunological thymus dependent memory cells may be implanted in the eye without the direct exposure to the antigen. So how is it possible that there was no direct exposure to the antigen, but there was a sensitization of these memory cells in the thymus? These cells proliferate on contact with the antigen. So sensitization is taking place, and as soon as they will come in contact with this antigen, should it reappear in the bloodstream, they will become differentiated to form the cytotoxic lymphocytes. Now this could explain the non-specific focal reaction that may occur in the eyes with the chronic inflammatory disease after the removal of the infected teeth or the areas of the focal infection. So anything could be there, like suppose there is a tooth removal or there was some area of focal infection, and due to this antigen has gone into the bloodstream. This even without the direct exposure to the antigen in the bloodstream, there could be sensitization of the memory cells in the thymus if they had previously exposed to, and there could be an antibody formation. Now uveitis can also represent a response to the antigenic stimuli in the other parts of the eye. So if you are having some antigenic stimuli, but it is in the other part of the eye, like for example this uvea retained the sensitized lymphocytes after the initial reaction. Suppose there was some initial reaction. So after that initial reaction, the lymphocytes are sensitized. They provide an immediate response should the cause of the inflammation reoccur. Then we can also have the iridocyclitis occur commonly with severe corneal infections. We can have choroiditis. There also means we can have secondary anterior uveitis due to intermediate as well as posterior uveitis. Then we can also have uveitis that can occur due to the hypersensitivity to the autologous tissue components. If there is a hypersensitivity reaction to certain tissue components, then that can also lead to uveitis. It is found in association with the Still's disease in the children. We have got SLE, then vaginous granulomatosis, sarcoidosis, ankylosing spondylitis, Ritter syndrome, relapsing polychondroiditis, Behcet syndrome, rheumatoid arthritis, which have autoimmune components. So there are actually a number of the autoimmune diseases which are responsible for creating the hypersensitivity reaction, and that is actually leading to the uveitis. A number of diseases are there, and you can clearly see all these are a possibility. So if a person is having a uveitis along with the features of SLE, go with that. if the person is having the uveitis along with the features of Still's disease, go with that. So all these diseases are actually the known causes which can actually lead to the uveitis. Okay, then a number of diseases which are associated with uveitis occur much more frequently in persons with certain HLA antigens. So again, there are certain diseases who are having the HLA compatibility, and the certain ones are more commonly involved with the uveitis. Thus, in patients with ankylosing spondylitis, 90% of them are HLA-B27 positive is there. Then there is also a disproportionately high percentage of patients of HLA-B27 antigenic group in the adult patients of the acute anterior uveitis. So if you remember when we discussed the iridocyclitis with the arthritis, okay, so the first important thing that shows the uveitis with arthritis is your ankylosing spondylitis, that is your HLA-B27 positive. Then the patient suffering from JCA also having the acute anterior uveitis. Now juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, if you see, these are actually juvenile means less than 16 years. So these people are less than 16 years, plus it is not the true rheumatoid arthritis because the rheumatoid factor is negative. So these two things will help me in making the diagnosis. They are negative for the rheumatoid factor and for the anti-nuclear antibodies. Now this is partially correct because all the types of JCA is not negative. So if I have the JRA, we have got the type 1, we have got type 2, and then we have got the Still's disease. So ANA is actually positive here also and positive here also, while this this is your pauci-articular. So if I talk about the pauci-articular, so here we can have the positive also and the negative also. So only 1/4 of the patients are actually negative for anti-nuclear antibodies. On the other hand, patients who are having the JCA and chronic anterior uveitis, although negative for the rheumatoid factor, have a high incidence of ANA. So what does this mean? See this. This is your pauci-articular, and what we call as type 2, this was your polyarticular, right? So if I divide this JCA into 3 types, this was your JCA, this is your pauci-articular, polyarticular, and then you have got the Still's disease. Now this pauci-articular, half of the people are positive for your anti-nuclear antibodies, half of the people are negative for the anti-nuclear antibodies. Now those who are positive, they will give you chronic anterior uveitis. They will be giving you chronic anterior uveitis, and the negative one, see, negative one, they will be showing you with the acute anterior uveitis. They will be giving you acute anterior uveitis. So chronic anterior uveitis and acute anterior uveitis, it is something like this, okay. Then on the other hand, we have got other diseases which are also associated with specific HLA antigens, like we have VKH disease and the Behçet's syndrome. Vogt-Koyanagi-Harrider disease and the Behçet's, they are again HLA important one, and but they are different from HLA-B27. Then neoplastic means certain areas, if you have remember that they are also presenting as a pseudo-uveitic syndrome, means they are presenting in the form of inflammation but not the exact inflammatory pathologies. So certain tumors, like we have retinoblastoma, malignant melanoma, iris melanomas, reticular cell sarcoma, then we have systemic hematological malignancies, leukemia, lymphoma, histiocytic cell sarcoma, they are actually present with the uveitis. This is called as the masquerade syndromes. Masquerade syndromes means what? Masquerade syndrome means which are simulating the appearance of uveitis, but actually they do not have uveitis. So those intraocular tumors which are simulating with uveitis is your retinoblastoma, iris melanoma, then we have reticular cell carcinoma, sarcomas, we have hematological malignancies like leukemia, lymphomas, histiocytic cell sarcoma. They can also present with the syndromes, that is your masquerade syndromes. Then we have got the traumatic one. Trauma may we have got the blunt trauma or the penetrating trauma, and they can produce iridocyclitis. So can you see the inflammations, the infections, and not only the infections, means every infection, bacterial infection, parasitic infections, viral infections, septicemic infections, neoplasias. Then we also have the trauma that can cause the uveitis, surgical trauma. Then we can even have the surgical surgical trauma from the intraocular procedures like cataract extraction, trabeculectomy, vitreoretinal surgeries can also produce post-operative uveitis, and I think you will relate with this. Whenever we read the post-operative complications of an intraocular surgery, relate with the cataract surgery, which is the most common one. So if you look at the complications of the cataract surgery, you have post-operative uveitis, you have cystoid macular edema, that is again a kind of uveitis, right? Then what is the distinguishing factor between the sterile post-operative inflammation and the infective endophthalmitis can be difficult, and the condition should be treated as infected in case of the doubt. A very, very important thing I will say, because many times I get this doubt even from the students that how to differentiate from the toxic anterior segment syndrome and the endophthalmitis. I must say a very difficult one, and you know, whenever we have this toxic anterior segment syndrome, even there also we can have chances of secondary infection. But the thing is that treated as the infective one unless proved otherwise, because you you cannot rule out the chances of infection even in a cases of toxic anterior segment syndrome, and it's always better to overcorrect, to give antibiotics rather than ignoring. So not a wise decision to exclude the antibiotics here. So what are the diseases actually which can be associated with the uveitis? So really a long list they have given, and I will not say to mug up, but go through that, you will get many things that you already know here. See, in the non-granulomatous acute, so you know that idiopathic is everywhere. Then you have got the infectious diseases. Now in the infectious diseases mein, we have already read bacterial hai, viral hai, parasitic hai, septicemic hai. So we have mumps, influenza, adenoviral, chlamydia, Lyme's, leptospirosis, Kawasaki disease, rickettsial diseases. Now Kawasaki I think is a very important one that you already read in the pediatrics, in the pathology. Then rickettsial diseases you read in the PSM, mumps and all you read in the pediatrics. So all these things try to correlate there. Then you have got a HLA-B27. HLA-B27 associated one are the ankylosing spondylitis, Ritter syndrome, Behçet's disease, psoriatic arthritis, inflammatory bowel syndrome. Then we read the lens-induced uveitis, in the lens-induced glaucomas also. Then you know the syndromes like we have Fuchs uveitic syndrome, we have got glaucomatocyclitic crisis, UGH syndrome. UGH syndrome you read in the post-operative complications of the cataract surgery. Trauma obviously can lead to inflammation. We always read this that a person who is having a trauma can be having glaucoma. It can be due to hyphema, that is blood in anterior chamber. It can be due to inflammation, that is inflammatory cells. Then we can have anterior segment ischemia could be there. We can have the secondary syphilis. Now looking at the chronic one. So chronic one are just 3, so you can go through it. It is your JCF. You can easily make a mnemonic for this. We have got the JCF. So J will be what? J will be your juvenile chronic arthritis. Then we have got C for chronic iridocyclitis, and then you have got F. F is your Fuchs uveitis syndrome. So remember it as a JCF. Then we have got the granulomatous. Granulomatous mein acute is very, very rare, so go for the chronic. And this is I think very easy because you know all the granulomatous diseases, like we have sarcoidosis, syphilis, toxoplasmosis, leptospirosis, leprosy, brucellosis. So all these things are your chronic one. Remember the fake one, anaphylactic, that is also the chronic one. Okay. Now coming to the clinical features. So if I talk about the clinical features, you know, the presentation is very, very different when I talk about anterior uveitis, when I talk of intermediate uveitis, and when I talk about posterior uveitis. So first let us start with the anterior uveitis, which is you know, typically a acute condition. So this kind of a patient usually comes with a sudden painful diminution of vision. So it is sudden, it is painful, and the thing is that we have spasm of the ciliary muscle, due to which we have photophobia. So we have photophobia, blurring of vision, pain, ciliary congestion will be there, you will have tenderness, all the signs of inflammation will be there, you will have the keratic precipitates, the flare, the cells. So because there is inflammation, cells will be released. These cells are released from where? if you look at the eye here, and we have the iris here, then we have the ciliary body, and we have the lens, and these are your ciliary processes. Okay. Now when I am saying that we have iridocyclitis, that means we have inflammation in this iris, and we also have the inflammation in the pars pliccata part of the ciliary body, anterior part. From here, now what is happening? The cells are released here. And what was present here? There was the aqueous humor. So we were having the aqueous humor here, and their cells are released. So these are actually your aqueous cells, and we also have the protein deposits. So we also have the aqueous flare, and flare is usually the first sign of the uveitis that we get. These are actually the protein deposits. These are actually the protein deposits that we get. Cells are there. We can mark it as 1+, 2+, and 3+. And what is happening? These are going, and they are actually going, and they are forming the deposits on the posterior surface of the cornea. So when they are going on the posterior surface of the cornea, then that are actually called as the keratic precipitates. They are the KPs, and this is how we get the aqueous flare, we get the aqueous cells, we get the keratic precipitates, we get the ciliary muscle spasm. Due to that we get the pain, we get the induced myopia, and that induced myopia will give you the blurring of vision. These keratic precipitates will also give me the corneal clouding, the corneal edema. This will again give me the blurring of vision, and obviously because it is involving the vascular coat of the eyeball, so we have the circumciliary congestion. Alright, so depending upon the clinical presentation, now I can say it is iritis, or it is cyclitis, or it is iridocyclitis, and aqueous flare and aqueous cells cannot be seen by the naked eye, so for that we require the slit lamp. The course of the disease varies, like if it's just a milder one, it takes about 2 to 4 weeks for the inflammation. It will show the good dilatation of the pupil with the cycloplegics, because in the uveitis you will get a very small miotic pupil, and you will have rapid resolution after starting the treatment. However, if it is chronic one, in the chronic cases the ciliary body is always seriously involved, and complete resolution may occur in mild cases treated early and suitably, particularly if early dilatation of the pupil has forestalled the development of the posterior synecdoche. So in most of the cases, if it is acute, it is getting resolution, but yes, there is a question mark if they are chronic ones, and if you are treating them early, they are getting resolved. In all cases, a characteristic feature is the tendency to relapse. So a very important thing is that the chances of recurrent uveitis are again very high. In cases of the uveitis, each fresh attack runs a similar course but less severe. Now another important thing is that it is less severe. Otherwise, whenever we have recurrent attacks, we usually say that it is severe, more severe one, but this is actually less severe, leaving further traces and increased impairment of vision. Now, although the next attacks will be less severe, but there will be increased impairment of vision because it is getting accumulated. So if I talk about the iritis, inflammation of the iris has fundamentally same characteristic as in the other connective tissue, because it consists of connective tissue. So we will have the dilatation of the blood vessels occurring in with the impairment of the capillary walls. You will have exudation of a protein rich fluid into the tissue spaces, and it is due to the release of these proteins that leads to aqueous flare. Owing to the extreme vascularity of the iris, the peculiar distribution of the vessels, and the looseness of the stroma, hyperemia tends to cause the pupil to contract. A very important thing, why actually we have the small and miotic pupil in cases of the iritis. So why we are having? Because we have hyperemia that tends to cause the pupil to contract mechanically on account of the radial disposition of the vessels. Now an unusually large amount of exudation and swelling will cause the iris to virtually become a waterlogged sponge full of sticky fluid, and therefore what is happening? Normal reactions are abolished. So you get miotic pupil, constricted pupil, you may get irregular due to synecdoche, you may get abnormal structure of the iris. There could be atrophic patches in the long term, but initially there will be clogging. So that typical structure of the iris that we have, that we call it as collared pattern, that will be disturbed. And uske alawa we will also have the sluggish reaction because this pupil will not be able to show the reaction. The extravasated fluid will also contain the substances which are acting as irritants, so that also causes the muscle fibers to contract. Now since the sphincter overcomes the action of the dilator muscle, constriction of the pupil results. So now certain, you know, in terms of the exudation, certain irritants are also released, and these irritants are causing the constriction of the muscle, and this constriction of the muscle will be more than the dilatation. So we see, sometimes we see the constriction but we are not able to see the dilatation, but more or less it is the sluggish reaction and the fixed one. It follows that in iritis you will get the constricted pupil, reaction sluggish, and the you will get the delicate pattern of the iris, instead of being clear, becomes very blurred and indistinct. The color also undergoes considerable changes. So what are the color changing? We have the blue iris becoming bluish or the yellowish green, or we have brown iris showing less difference but become grayish and yellowish brown. So in total I can say that there will be change in the color as well as structure of the iris. So we are having the changes at the level of conjunctiva, we have circumcorneal congestion, we have changes at the level of cornea. That is, we are having corneal edema, we are having the keratic precipitates, we can have opacification, we can have blurring of vision. Then in the anterior chamber, we can have the aqueous cells, we can have aqueous flare. Then we are having the iris changes, changes in the color, changes in the structure. We can have the synechys, and then we have a lot of changes in the pupil, because, you know, iris is showing you the differences. So there will be a change in the sphincter. So we are not getting the constriction and the dilatation. So it is sluggish. But if at all it is present, then it is the constriction that is present, and we get a small pupil due to the release of irritants and not the dilatation. A comparison between the two iris will reveal some difference. So because it is usually unilateral, so you will get the heterochromia. So if it is unilateral, you will get the heterochromia and you will get the different color of the iris. The hyperemia will also manifest in the form of circumcorneal congestion, and you should know what is the difference between this circumcorneal congestion from the conjunctival congestion. Circumcorneal. So circumcorneal may what you are going to get, you are getting the inflammation all around this area, that is your what you called as limbus, and it is following the ciliary vessel, something like this. It is following the ciliary vessel, something like this. This is your circumcorneal congestion, and the fornices will be empty. But when you have this conjunctival congestion, limbal area will be empty and you will have the congestion more towards the fornices. Then most marked if the ciliary body is seriously involved. So this hyperemia will be more if more and more ciliary body is involved, since the iris is richly supplied with the sensory nerves. And what is the supply? With the ophthalmic division of the trigeminal nerve. Pain is there, and that is worse at night. Again, a very important symptom. So we will have circumcorneal congestion, we will have pain, and especially which is worse at night. It is not confined to the eye, although severe neuralgic pain is felt here, but also referred to the other branches of the nerve. So that is the reason that it is also going to the forehead, it is going to the scalp, cheeks, malar bone, sometimes to the nose and teeth. So everywhere it is going. So this patient is actually in grave pain who is coming with the uveitis. Then we have got the albuminous exudates escaping into the anterior chamber. So these protein exudates are escaping into the anterior chamber, that is leading to the turbidity in the aqueous humor, that is your flare, particularly if the ciliary body is involved, and the aqueous becomes plasmoid containing the leukocytes, minute flakes of the coagulated proteins could be there, fibrinous exudates could be there. So it becomes actually hazy, it forms a milky flare, and this flare is actually seen in the slit lamp. Slit lamp may will make a very small slit. We make only this much amount of slit in order to see the 2 mm slit to see the flare. Okay, now this turbidity will actually interfere with the clear view of the iris and is easily mistaken for the haziness of the cornea. So it is not actually haziness of the cornea can occur due to the keratic precipitates, haziness can occur due to corneal edema, but this is actually the turbidity of the aqueous humor which is taking place. In very intense cases, we can have the polymorphonuclear leukocytes pouring. They are sinking to the bottom to form the hypopion. So when the exudates have become very, very large, they will sink to the bottom, they will form the hypopion. We can also have blood in the anterior chamber, that is hyphema, but they means they are rare, but they can take place. At the same time, nutrition of the corneal endothelium becomes affected, cells become sticky, desquamate, and that is why we have got a lot of inflammatory cells there. These inflammatory cells are going, depositing on the posterior surface of the cornea and forming the keratic precipitates. So again, they are a very, very important features of iridocyclitis. Keratic precipitates is rather the most important feature. The exudates poured out by the iris, they also cover the surface of the iris as a thin film, and completely they will come over the pupillary area. So when these are very, very profuse, this is actually called as the plastic iridocyclitis. Again, a very important question asked by the students so many times, that what is the meaning of plastic? Plastic means that you are having the fibrin deposits, exudate deposits just over the whole of the surface of the iris. That is called as the plastic iritis. The pupil may get blocked, and once the pupil is blocked, obviously the sight will be greatly impaired. Moreover, the adhesions, because now what is happening, now this iris is adhered to the lens capsule because of the exudates, and it becomes fixed. So normally what happens, if this is your cornea, we have got the iris like this and you have got the lens, but now what is happening, this iris will go and this is something like this. Now what is happening, this iris is going and it is accumulating on the anterior surface of the lens, something like this. So this is actually your synechiae or the adhesions we have, and these adhesions will actually lead to much more sequelae also. So what is happening, so if you are instilling this atropine or hometropine at a very early stage, the iris may be freed and the pupil just becomes dilated and circular, but if you are late, adhesions formation will take place and then it will be just irregularly dilated. So if this is irregularly dilated, then this is called as the festooned pupil. It is irregularly dilated, then this will be called as the festooned pupil. Alright. In the such cases, we can also have the spot of exudates or the pigment derived from the posterior layer of the iris may be left permanently over the anterior capsule of the lens, and that can form a evidence of previous iritis. So like we see in cases of the acute congestive glaucoma also, we always have that walk stride. Similarly, if you look at the patient of iritis who had previously suffered from the attack of iritis, again you are able to see some evidence on the slit lamp. If however the adhesions are allowed to become organized, they are converted into the fibrous bands with which the atropine is unable to rupture, and these fibrous bands are unable to rupture by the atropine, and such form adhesions are actually called as the posterior synechiae. Now posterior synechiae means what? Posterior synechiae means adhesions, and posterior means posterior to the iris. So if there are adhesions posterior to the iris that I showed here, these are the adhesions which are posterior to the iris. What is happening here? Suppose this is your iris, so this is going and only this pupillary margin is going and it is adhesioned on the anterior surface of the lens, then that is called as your posterior synechiae in the ring, that is ring synechiae. But if whole of the iris goes, suppose this is your lens here and whole of the iris goes and it's accumulate and adhesioned on the surface of the lens, then this is called as a total synechiae. So there is a difference. This is your total synechiae, while this one, can you see this one? This one is your ring synechiae, this here and this here. Can you see the difference here? So there is bowing of the iris here because this is accumulation of the aqueous humor behind, so it is pushing the iris. So slowly and gradually we will get ballooning, and due to this accumulation of the aqueous humor here, this iris will be getting ballooned here. So this iris also getting ballooned here. So this is actually called as your iris Bombay formation. This is called as the iris Bombay formation, where you have ballooning of the iris. You will have sudden closure of the angle of anterior chamber that will lead to the acute congestive glaucoma. So I think you have understood what do you mean by the posterior synecdoche here. They show some predilection over the lower part of the pupil in early stages. Why more predilection towards the lower part? Because of the gravity. When they are localized and mydriatic causes the intervening portions of the circle to dilate. So that will be your festooned appearance. So I told you when they are dilating with the irregular one. So when they are dilating with the irregular appearance, then this is actually called as your festooned pupil, right? Such a irregular pupil is again a sign of your past iritis. Now, owing to the contraction of the organizing exudates, the pigmentary epithelium on its posterior surface may be pulled around the pupillary margin so that the patches of the pigment could be seen on the anterior segment of the iris. Now, if you are seeing these patches of the pigment on the anterior segment of the iris, then this is called as the ectropion of the uveal pigment. Then in the severe cases, plastic iritis or after the recurrent attack, whole of the pupillary margin may be tied down on the anterior capsule of the lens, then that is your annular synecdoche or the ring synecdoche, and that is called as seclusio pupillae. So this is what I told you. If it is something like this and this is your lens, whole of the pupillary margin is going and it is adjacent on the anterior surface of the lens layer, anterior surface of the lens here. So this is called as your ring synecdoche or your annular synecdoche, or it is called as the seclusio. This is called as the seclusio pupillae. This is called as the seclusio pupillae. Now, it is of great danger to the eye since it is unrelieved. It can lead to secondary angle closure glaucoma. Now, why it can lead to angle closure glaucoma? As I explained you that what will happen now, aqueous humor will start accumulating behind this iris. So what will happen? It will keep on pushing the iris anteriorly, and a time will come when you will have the pushing of the iris anteriorly, something like this. That means the iris Bombay formation will take place. So there is a sudden closure. So what is happening now? Sudden closure of angle of anterior chamber. So aqueous humor is not able to pass here, aqueous humor is not able to pass here. So due to this iridocorneal contact, we will have sudden closure of angle of anterior chamber. So sudden angle closure glaucoma will take place, right? And the aqueous is unable to pass forward into the anterior chamber and it collects behind the iris and it becomes a iris becomes bored, that is called as iris Bombay, that we have discussed. The anterior chamber from the front will be your funnel shaped and it will be deepest at the center, shallowest in the periphery. Now the filtration angle is therefore obliterated by the opposition of the iris to the cornea, and eventually the adhesions may form, that is your peripheral anterior synecdoche. Now what does this mean? So if this has taken place and there is a sudden closure of the angle of anterior chamber and it is not able to pass, now what can happen? Adhesions can form here. So these adhesions are called as the peripheral anterior synecdoche. So this actually leads to the chronic congestive glaucoma. Now permanently this angle is closed. Chronic congestive glaucoma, it can lead to the circulation of the aqueous is therefore obstructed and you will get permanently ocular tension rise. Okay, so see here. This is your posterior synecdoche with festooned appearance. This is the irregular appearance of the pupil, the festooned appearance of the pupil that you can see on the dilatation. So when the exudates are more extensive, then what is happening? Then it may organize across the entire pupillary area. Entire pupillary area means whole of the iris gets adhesion on the anterior surface of the lens. Then that will lead to your blocked pupil or the occlusio pupillae. That will be your total synecdoche. If there has been much cyclitis, posterior chamber also fills with the exudates. So that will be forming your total posterior synecdoche, as I told you. Now in worst of the cases of the plastic iridocyclitis, you can also have a cyclitic membrane behind the lens. So even a cyclitic membrane, so you can get a all except question also. We are having so many things due to the uveitis, and nowadays when you are expecting more of the clinical questions, a person can come to you and on examination they can say you can see this, you can see circumcorneal congestion, keratic precipitates, aqueous cells, aqueous flares, posterior synecdoche or the annular synecdoche, you can have iris Bombay formation, hypopion, hyphema, cyclitic membrane. There are so many things that you can find. In young young children, there is a condition called as pseudoglioma. These are intraocular tumors. In the later stages, the degenerative changes in the ciliary body prevent it from fulfilling its functions of supplying the eye with the intraocular fluid and the nutrition. So what happens here? First of all, the vitreous becomes fluidic, and later lens also becomes opaque, and you can have the complicated cataract because of the disturbance with the nutrition, and there will be stoppage of the formation of this fluid. Now, because aqueous humor is not able to form, so you will have hypotony. So that condition will be called as the phthisis bulbi, and smaller eyeball is formed. So this is the thing, and these are the things which you are getting in the sarcoidal posterior uveitis. So this will be seen when we will move towards the intermediate uveitis or the pars planitis. So for today we have discussed the anatomy and physiology of the uveal tract. What are the conditions that can cause the uveitis, right? What are the infections, the tumors, then what is pseudoglioma, what are the conditions that can mimic like uveitis, then how to find out whether it is granulomatous, non-granulomatous, acute, chronic, what is the most common type of classification of uveitis, that is your this anterior, intermediate and the posterior. And then we have fully discussed the clinical features of anterior uveitis, that is iridocyclitis. So this is all for today, and we'll meet again with the next session of this Parsons series with continuation of the uveal tract. Thank you and happy ophthalmology.